Today we're going to make some decorative scatter terrain for your sci-fi or industrial tabletop game. It's a pretty straightforward project, but I did try out a few new techniques that I'm eager to share with you, so let's get to it. So first, go out and buy some half-inch PVC pipe fittings from your home improvement store or your hardware store. These are really cheap, less than $1 a piece. Note that these are slip fittings, not threaded. Threaded are a little more expensive and unnecessary for our purposes. Get a variety of combinations for future projects. I'm going to take a 3-way T and a 90-degree elbow and glue them together. Hot glue should work, but I know that super glue is very strong on plastic, so I used it. Then I black bombed it. Note that this is slick plastic, so acrylic paint has no hope of sticking. I used Rust-Oleum black matte finish instead, and even though it takes 4 hours to dry, it's very tough. I can't even chip it off if I tried. Here are the exact colors that I used for the following rust effect. Chop off a bit of sponge, and begin with the Folk Art Burnt Umber. This should be pretty heavy coverage, don't need to be delicate, and you're aiming for about 95% coverage. Just a tiny bit of black still popping through. Oh, and I recently got this simple battery-powered fan. I keep it running next to me and I put my work next to it, which accelerates the drying by like a lot. Next up is the Craftsmart Brown. For this shade, you're aiming for about 50% coverage. And notice that after loading the sponge with paint, I dab a lot of it off on the paper. This will give you a finer speckle than if you just went right at it. And that's what you want here. You should have to press kinda hard on the pipe in order to get some color onto it. That's how you know that you've dabbed off enough onto the paper. Also, and this is really important, ensure that you're constantly rotating the sponge with every strike in order to keep it looking random. Next up is Craftsmart Terracotta. For this shade, you want about 25% coverage or less. Really, you're just picking out some random spots with it. The key here is don't go overboard with it, and make sure you dab off the excess paint so that you get a fine speckle. And then hit it with Americana Honey Brown, exactly as you did the terracotta. Again, don't go overboard, that's going to be your natural tendency. I'm telling you, bleed off a lot of paint. You can always add more, but you can't take it off. And remember to rotate the sponge so that you don't get any patterns. And now the fun part. This is like watching a miracle happen before your eyes. Sponge on the Deco Art Shimmering Silver. Now the coverage here is whatever you like. If the piece is very old, then don't use much at all. But if the rust is just beginning, well then coat most of it. What I did here is something in the middle. Picked a few locations on the pipe that had a large surface area that was not yet rusted. Just keep on patting away with the sponge till it becomes fully covered by the silver. Large patches of silver and large patches of no silver are crucial to getting a more chaotic, natural look. Now we'll make a base for our terrain, exactly as we did back in episode 51. To quickly recap, take your dollar store foam board and cut out the footprint that you want. For 28mm wargaming, this should be somewhere between 6 and 12 inches across. By the way, a lot of inquiries as to what brand this is. Remember that the reason we love this cheap stuff is that the paper comes off so easily. So if you don't have a Dollar Tree around, the brand is called Ready Board, and it's 3/16 of an inch thick. Anyway, peel the paper off of one side and attach to some chipboard using an extra strength glue stick. Again, a lot of inquiries as to where this huge piece of chipboard I'm using. It's technically not chipboard, it's which you would find at the back of a legal notepad, that brown-gray stuff, but it is very similar. What I've been using lately is actually a backer for a large picture frame, sometimes also referred to as a mat board. So you can find a big sheet of this over in the picture framing section of the crafting store. This sheet was like, I don't know, 3 feet by 2 feet for $9. and it's lasted me forever. So we let the glue stick dry a bit and then we attach them. Then chop away the excess chipboard with scissors so that we have a nice flush edge going all the way around. Then we peel the paper off and slice away with a fresh, fully extended blade in our knife to get a nice taper around the edges. And finally we use sandpaper, 150 grit or finer, to quickly smooth out the tapers. It takes about 30 seconds to do the whole piece. Again, professional terrain makers would use a thin MDF board, cut it with a jigsaw, and then sand away at the edges to get the bevel. With this method you don't need power tools and you don't need any MDF. And this entire assembly from start to finish took me 4.5 minutes. So pick a spot on your base and hot glue the pipe to it. Lightly trace where you want your pools of toxic sludge to go. One of them should be right underneath the open pipe. Paint those areas with pure acetone to get some nice recessions. Inject some hot glue into the pipe and then press out a bunch of it right at the mouth so that it droops down into the pool below. If it's not thick enough, just let it cool completely and then keep adding to it until you're happy with it. Now, as we've done many times before on the channel, apply plain white PVA glue to all of the non-pool surfaces and flock with some pebbles and sand. And I used neon green for the toxic pools. This is a really terrible cheap paint I'm using, so I'm just dumping it on really thick so I don't have to do 8 to 12 coats of it. Now the earth around this stuff should be blasted and desert-like, leached of all nutrients, and I wanted to take the opportunity to try and expand my repertoire for doing the ground. So usually I just base with burnt umber and dry brush with tan, but I wanted to try something new. So I started with a solid wet base coat of Americana milk chocolate, and then while it's still wet, I took my burnt umber, watered it down pretty heavily, and applied it to a few random spots. Now notice right now this does not look great, it's just a dark splotch in the middle of the lighter color, but everything is so wet that I tried to do a wet blend. So I used the brush at the perimeter of the dark spot and just kind of dab at it, alternating direction. Pull from light to dark and then dark to light, etc. Twist the brush a little bit, just keep dabbing at it and working it, and you'll see with a short amount of practice that it's easy to get the knack and you can get a nice gradient instead of a hard perimeter where the light meets the dark. Once that's totally dry, I took my milk chocolate again and mixed it with a little bit of yellow. I just eyeballed it, but I'm guessing it was probably like 4 parts brown and 1 part yellow. And mixed it up. Then I dry brushed the base with it. So here's an insight from one newbie to you. In the past, I've seen tutorials where they dry brush like 3 to 5 shades to obtain color depth, and it just seemed like a waste of effort to me for such little reward, so I never bothered. But this time I did, and I applied the technique that the pros use, and it paid off. So you take your base coat paint, so that milk chocolate color, and you mix it with a little bit of a much lighter color, usually some kind of off-white. I used yellow here because I wanted a bit of an orangey look, but the point is, make sure the color you're using is your actual base coat foundation color, and you're mixing it with a lighter one, and the result is going to look much more natural. It's amazing how well this orange that I created fits on top of the base coat. So anyway, I dry brush everything with that using fairly good pressure. It's a pretty bold dry brush. And then for a little extra variation, I did get out my trusty old Craftsmart tan and dry brush much more lightly and only in a few random patches, maybe half the base. Again, this is what I was talking about. The complexity of this earth looks way better than anything I've ever tried before. I really like doing the wet blend in the base coat and then dry brushing with 2 colors to get a good variety and a natural look. Oh, one other quick note. Get that neon green again and nick strongly at the edges of the pools, kind of implying that they're glowing. Okay, so then I mixed up some acrylic water kit and poured it into the pools. Here's the brand. I mixed with a popsicle stick, and then I used that stick to help coax the epoxy up against the edges and scoop it up onto the effluent from the pipe. And one final touch, hot glue some dead moss up against the pipe. So I'm Wylock, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.